All right, thank you, Melissa. President McConnell, trustees. I'm going to present a little bit of information on the reduced rate program for the district. And at the end, as Melissa mentioned, we will be asking you for a specific direction from the board. Next slide. A little bit of history on the reduced rate program. The program did start in 2017 for the 2017-18 fiscal year. The program was established as a 10% savings to homeowners who met certain income eligibility requirements. We first enrolled folks at about 1,800 households, and then the program has continued since. In 2020, right around March and April, obviously in response to the COVID stay-at-home orders, the board gave us direction in order to increase the percentage savings from 10% up to 17.5% savings. At the time, we also saw a decline in enrollment, and I believe last year, right around this time, we came back to the board and gave a presentation sort of giving the outline of the history of why we think that might be the case. We increased our outreach efforts and did see an increase up to about 1,081 enrollees this past fiscal year. Next slide. As I had stated, the most significant reason that we increased from 10% to 17.5% was due to the COVID stay-at-home orders and the impact that was either known or unknown at the time that the stay-at-home orders were going to have on the economy. The most significant of those was really the unemployment rate. You can see from the chart that unemployment spiked in April of 2020 from around 4% unemployment up to almost 16% unemployment. It was fairly unprecedented, and we really at the time had no idea what was going to be happening in the future, whether that was going to be sustained, get higher. We had no idea. The good news is that over the past almost 2 years now, that the unemployment rate has dropped down to just above 4% and roughly is at the same level or just slightly above the level it was pre-pandemic. So that's the good news here. Next slide. To give a little bit of understanding of what that increase from 10% to 17.5% did for the district, the 10% reduction equated to about a $75 savings per household for any eligible households. At 1,081 eligible households, that's a financial loss to the district of about $81,000 a year. That's the 10% reduction. When that number went up to 17.5%, the annual savings to the homeowner in our program increased to just under $131 per year. For a financial loss to the district of about $141,000. Next slide. So in summary, the increase from 10 to 17.5% was about a $56 per year reduction savings to qualified homeowners, and it was about a $61,000 loss to the district annually. So I'm presenting these numbers just to give you an idea of what happens with what 10% for 17.5% means on a fiscal basis, both to the homeowner as well as to the district. Next slide. Thanks. There were some other economic factors just so we're throwing into the mix, and we're going to have a discussion right now about what to do about that 17.5%. The most significant one that's really happening in the economy now is the inflation rate. This is the inflation rate excluding food and shelter, food and housing, for I believe it's the United States number at this point, this one. And you can see that it sort of dropped down when the pandemic first hit. It stabilized for a number of months. And really in 2021, inflation has skyrocketed up to around 9% right now. This isn't news really to anybody. What this does to the district is we're subject to the same inflationary pressures that any household is. And so while our households are experiencing increase of costs of particularly energy, fuel, that sort of thing, the district is experiencing those same kinds of cost increases, particularly with fuel and in the cost of construction and construction materials. Next slide. So right now we're coming to you asking sort of this policy question, because now's the time of year that we're going to be advertising the program. We tell the people who are in the program already, it's when it's time for them to renew, what the program is going to be in terms of a reduction. And we also intend to do additional advertising to get new participants. And we want to be able to tell them as well how much the reduction is going to be. Next slide. The policy question is whether we stay at 17.5%, whether we go back to the 10%, or do something in between. Arguments for going back to the 10% reduction are that the program increase was really intended to be a temporary increase to try to adjust to the economic shock of the time in early 2020. And unemployment and the employment rates have returned to pre-COVID levels. There is a financial loss to the district, which is compounded by inflationary impacts to the district. So those would be arguments to move back to the 10%. However, there are also compelling arguments to not make that change at this time. The first of which is that our program is really an income-based program. And just because the employment rate within the community has gotten better, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's had much of an impact actually on the people who are within our program. Because our program is an income-based program, not an employment-based program. Also, the COVID economic impacts continue to be volatile within the community. We really don't know what's coming next. And so there are some arguments that would say, maybe now is not the right time to change. Next slide. Melissa and I put our heads together and have come up with a staff recommendation to the board, which we would like you to consider as sort of what we think is the best course moving forward, which is to take a 2-year phased-in approach. Taking the 17.5% rate where it is right now, next fiscal year, moving that down to a 14% rebate, and then the year after that, moving it back to the 10% that it was when we first created the program. So taking 2 years in order to do that. Next slide. So possible options that you have before you are you can return to the 10% reduction over 2 years, which is staff recommendation. You can return to the 10% immediately. You could make the 17.5% reduction a permanent policy choice, or you could continue the 17.5% current reduction for 1 more year, and then have us come back to you a year from now and have this discussion again. So at this point, I'd like to turn the discussion back over to you, President McConnell, and to the trustees and ask that question, should the district discontinue the 17.5% reduction and change back to 10% or do something different?
Thank you, Mr. Tucker, for the presentation. It's very concise and to the point. I think I would support the 2-year step down that you have suggested as the alternate. But I do have a question about the methodology of this. Recently, we shifted as a district to putting the bills onto the property tax bills. That benefits people who are single-family house people and are watching that rate. But if we're trying to reach impoverished people, many of whom live in multi-family houses, how does that impact or help them?
Sure. We went back to billing on the property taxes in 2017-18, which was the same time this program was created. And I think the program was created in response to the idea that the cost burden was what was probably shared among some renters paid for it, some didn't, and all homeowners paid for it. It shifted all to the responsibility of the homeowner at that time. And I think this was a recognition, this program, to try to help out those homeowners that were then seeing this shift to them, who, for instance, may have been renting out properties at the time. Because it's billed on the property taxes, there isn't a very good way in order to sort of pass on any types of savings to renters, because rent is controlled by the marketplace. It's controlled by what the landlord wants to charge and can charge for that property, and isn't necessarily dependent upon what the inputs are. It's not dependent upon what a mortgage is or what the sewer charges may be. It's dependent upon really what the market can bear. And so if we were to provide rate reductions to folks, say in rental units, there's no way for us as a mechanism to ensure that that savings was passed on to the renter. And so we find ourselves in a little bit of a quandary there. And that's why most programs, when I've looked at these throughout the state, don't really have a way of addressing this with renters.
Well, thank you for that observation, Mr. Tucker. Questions, comments from board members? I don't have the whole screen available to me. Supervisor Anna, can I see your hand?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I, like you, support the 17.5% for the 2 years. I think we still have families living in very difficult situations. We're not in recovery by any stretch of the imagination at this point. So I can support that, and we rethink it in 2 years, see where we're at. Thank you.
Hey, I don't see any other people I have available on my screen.
Loera Diaz has
Yes,
her hand up.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I totally agree with keeping the 17.5% reduction for the next 2 years. I think we are far from seeing people get back on their feet. There's a lot of folks that, even though the unemployment rate, statistics say that they've dropped, there's a lot of folks out there that still are not employed. And as we enter this year, we know that it's so uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. So it doesn't make sense to charge them more when later on we're probably more than likely going to have to take that back and reduce it again. So I would like to see the reduction continue. And as time progresses and we see what's happening with our residents, then we can evaluate it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mayor, this is Councilmember Meisner.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I also agree. So there's not an option to have 17.5% for the next 2 years. It just says 1 year, and then reevaluate. So I think we're making a different choice than what's one of the options. And I support the 2 years as well. And I kind of would like to have this looked at. There's definitely a loss to the district, but how is that compared to what kind of savings do we see? Where does this come from? How is it impacting the budget overall? Overall it's a small amount of money, but it depends on where it's coming from. So I think when it gets revisited, maybe looking at it in context of the entire budget would be really helpful. Thank you.
So thank you. Anybody else?
To answer your question, this comes out of property taxes. There's a very minimal amount of our annual revenue that is property tax related. Right now, the bulk of that goes to flood control. And as you've heard in the discussions we've had with regard to stormwater, we're underfunded in that regard. But under Proposition 218, we can't use user fees, the regular user fees, to supplant any portion of a property owner's charges. So the modicum of money that we receive through property taxes is the only source we have. So that's where the money comes from. And this is the only pot of money that can be used towards a reduced rate program under 218.
Yeah, I was aware of that. I know that the fees can't be, because a fee is a fee for service, and so you can't take somebody's fees and reduce somebody else's bill. But yeah, and I see the issue with the storm drain. But I know that we're looking at some other options in that regard. So, I think maybe looking at it in a bigger context when it comes back, depending on what happens with storm drain fees. So, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, the consensus seems to be for put it on hold, or keep it at 17.5 for 2 years. Does anybody else want to weigh in on it?
Trustee Riola has her hand up.
Yes, go ahead. I've lost the video on my screen.
Oh dear, we need to get Naveed in there to help you out. Okay, so I concur with Katie. I was confused when people are saying return it for 2 years for the 17.5% reduction when I'm looking at the four options here. So if we continued for 1 more year and then reevaluate that, that doesn't seem like such a, it's almost 2 years, right? And after a year, and then you look at it again and then reevaluate, and maybe it needs to be considered for another year. Is
Sure.
that what people are saying, what the other trustees are saying, just to go with 2 years rather than what is on the board here?
I could clarify real quickly. I put down 1 year as an option because within a 2-year period, not only will we know the results of the stormwater vote, which this revenue source impacts stormwater program, we'll also have gone through the budgeting process again. And so we'll be able to get the direction at that point during the budgeting process. So we could certainly do the 17.5% for next fiscal year and then readdress it during the budget process for the following year.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Jeff. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? I would be inclined to agree with this recommendation that's recently articulated by Mr. Tucker, but it seems to me we have sort of a split amongst the board. Is there anybody else who wants to clarify their position?
Can I add something?
Yes.
The economy has been hit in a way that hasn't happened in a very long time with COVID. So I personally think that it's going to take a good 2 years, if not more, to recoup. I mean, this is already February, and we didn't start on the right foot. I mean, there's just continues to be unemployment. So I guess I'll go with whatever others decide, but I'm really inclined to do it for the full 2 years because there's people hurting right now, and I realize that this is going to come from a certain portion of the budget. But if we don't do this for our residents now, that they don't have the money, that they're struggling, then when are we going to do it? I would say just do it the full 2 years and let it be. But I'm only one person, so I guess we're going to have to kind of agree either way.
Well,
Thank you.
Let's have the clerk call the roll. We'll say either 2 years or the 1 year with the re-examined 1 year, and maybe we can get some
President
direction to
McConnell, I see Trustee Brown's hand is up.
And Trustee
Good,
Dews
go
was
ahead.
up.
Okay, we'll take them in that order.
Thank you. That would have worked out for me anyway. I think that I appreciate the presentation. I think that I would agree that I would prefer to see 2 years, but especially based on some of just the stark data that was presented today and why it's so important. And I think Councilman Gloria Diaz brought up a good point just about where we're at right now and the amount of time it will take to hopefully see some results in return. So, I would support 2 years, but I'd like to hear what my colleagues think as well.
Okay, that's about 3 for 2 years and 2 for the step down. Anybody else?
I'll go along, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Vice
I'll
President.
go along with Councilmember Loretta Diaz and Trustee Brown, the 2 years.
So that's 4-2. I think that's.
Well, if you're counting votes, this is Trustee Hannigan.
Yeah.
I don't know that we could do this, but legally, I'm not going to change my position. It was initially 2 years, and it's going to take a long time for folks to recover. You've heard it from a number of us. So I think we should call for the vote and move on.
I agree. So we don't have it agendized. We have this agendized for providing directions to staff rather than a vote. But what I would suggest is the clerk take an informal poll.
I see that there's 5 who support the 2 years remaining.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that sounds what it is. Seems to be what it is. So I think that gives direction.
Mayor, this is Councilmember Meester. I did have another question that I wanted to, because this is funded by property tax. I just don't want us to put the district in a place where they're in arrears in that account. It all depends on what happens with the storm drain rate. So maybe Melissa or Jeff could weigh in.
You can be assured that we'll be back to talk to the board either way regarding the stormwater vote. We'll know results for in early April. If the result of the vote is not positive for the district and the no's win, it will mean some pretty significant reductions in level of service in relation to the stormwater fund. So we would have to come back to the board at that point and have pretty significant conversations about the directions of levels of service within that program. This program would probably come up in the context of that discussion.
Okay, does that give the board enough direction about the feeling, the staff enough feelings about the direction of the board as to what they want to do with this apparent split?
Yes.
I feel like I have clear direction.
Yes, I think we do.
All right, then.